Hi, Karen. 75% of payers state reducing costs and eliminating paper checks is a high priority, but IT costs, staff training, and the complexities that follow make it difficult to introduce a new payment process to an existing workflow. What if you could go fully electronic overnight? Introducing Echo, your partner in Payments Simplified. Revolutionary payment solutions for payers of all sizes. Echo addresses the 4 payment hurdles and connects payers to over 1 million providers and vendors electronically with compliance in all critical areas. Simply file, fund, and let Echo handle the rest through a variety of payment methods. A single source for all payment data. Experience Echo, Payments Simplified.
Welcome to our first mega session, positioning the claims departments as a strategic partner. Moderating today's session is Kathy Elwood, founder, Elwood Enterprises, a consulting firm that helps organizations and leaders achieve their strategic objectives. Kathy formed Elwood Enterprises after 25-plus years with Nationwide Insurance, working in claims as well as a wide range of leadership positions in corporate strategy, information technology, and finance. Joining Kathy for today's session is Scott Johnson, Claims Director, Mile Auto, Inc., Naomi Kinderman, Assistant Vice President, Counsel for W.R. Berkley Corporation, and Joe Fuller, CTO at Mile Auto, Inc. Kathy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I have to admit, when I first agreed to moderate this session, I never thought our session would be virtual. Talk about having to shift your strategy really quickly. Today, we're going to be talking about positioning the claims organization as a strategic partner. To set the right context, I want to make sure that we have the same understanding of how we define strategy. When I think about it as the choices that we make to achieve long-term financial goals. It's about what we're going to do, but it's also about what we're not going to do. Since claims are often the single largest spend for an insurance company, I personally think it's critical that those who make the strategic choices understand the impact that their choices are going to have on the bottom line profitability. And one of the best ways to do that is to have somebody with a solid understanding of the business, the customers, and the products and services it provides sitting at the table. That in of itself ought to provide justification for making sure claims is there, because for the most part, claims understands every single function of the business. There really aren't any other people in the organization that have the opportunity firsthand, day in and day out, to know what customers need, what they prefer, and what they want the way claims people do. From my experience, investing in operational improvements in claims is one of the most effective ways organizations can achieve their strategic objectives and drive profitable growth. And even with what's going on right now, I don't think that's going to change. In fact, I think it's going to become more important. Technology is going to keep changing at breakneck speeds, and so are customer needs, right? So, in fact, by 2030, millennials and Gen Zs are going to make up over 50% of the population. Their needs and expectations are going to be significantly different than Gen X's and baby boomers, especially when it comes to digital delivery and interactions with companies. So what does this mean for carriers? It means that strategies are going to need to be deliberately designed. They're going to need to be designed to be prepared, adaptive, and responsive to the ever-changing needs of customers. Big bets are going to need to be placed on emerging technologies, especially those that can help redefine the customer experience and their interactions with the companies. Carriers with cultures and operating models that are agile are more likely to succeed. Why? because they're going to be able to respond faster to change in customer preferences, and they're going to be able to be better prepared to realize the benefits from the emerging technologies faster than their competition. So, most claims organizations, in my opinion, they're more strategically prepared by nature and operationally adaptive because they've always had to be ready for whatever happens next. They've learned how to think strategically and act operationally. In other words, they get stuff done. We're really fortunate, in my opinion, to have 3 outstanding claims leaders who are going to share with you today their insights and perspectives on claims and how it impacts strategy. And most importantly, after you hear a little bit more about what they do, I think you're going to agree with me. They get stuff done. Scott, he's the claims director at Mile Auto. It's a pay-per-mile auto insurance company that leverages patented computer vision technologies to help low-mileage drivers save money. Prior to this, he was a founding partner at Diamond Specialty Insurance, and he got his career started as an adjuster at Progressive. He later went on to become a senior vice president of claims at Direct General, and he's held a lot of different positions over his career that involved leading and transforming key business areas, including claims, underwriting, customer service, process development, and leadership. Naomi is a vice president of senior claims counsel for Berkeley Insurance Company, and she serves as the assistant vice president counsel for W.R. Berkeley Corporation. She's responsible for providing litigation and claims oversight for bad faith and litigation and high exposure for complex claims for several of Berkeley's companies throughout the enterprise. She also manages the enterprise-wide coverage council panel. Prior to joining W.R. Berkeley, she was an assistant vice president at the Hartford, and in that role, she directed and managed bad faith and extra contractual litigation across all lines of business. And prior to that, she was in private practice in Connecticut. Joe, he's the chief technology officer and also one of the co-founders of Mile Auto. He was also a co-founder of VCon, which provided artificial intelligence and machine learning systems for insurers and government entities to accurately measure vehicle mileage. He holds 5 utility patents in connected vehicle data and auto insurance systems. It's pretty darn impressive, I have to say so myself. So what we're going to be doing is going through a series of questions on how these organizations actually deal with strategy and strategic issues. And feel free to put up some questions on the chat board if you want. We're going to save the questions until the end and try to get through all of them. We're going to allow time to do so. And if we're not able to get through all of them, we will definitely get back with you and try to answer them individually at a later point. So without any more from me, let's go ahead and get started. So, Scott, let me begin with you. How does the claims organization at Mile Auto participate in strategy? Scott, can you hear me?
I can, yes. Sorry. Thank you, Kathy. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here and tell you a little bit about what we do here at Mile. From a strategic seat perspective at Mile Auto, I would say that claims absolutely has a seat at that strategy table, and that we spend a lot of time either weekly or bi-weekly in meetings with our department heads. So each department gathers up and we have an agenda that we work through, and we meet with the executive team as well. So as a group, we kind of work through all the issues that we might face, and claims has an opportunity to share kind of what we're seeing out in the field, what we're seeing through our trend data. And then because of that equal seat, because we're not operationally built up in silos, we've got a chance to share data across all the functional lines quickly, and that enables us to move quickly, to react quickly, to maybe the things that might be considered negative trends. We're able to get after them a lot quicker than maybe organizations that are more siloed up. So, I think this is a great place from a claims perspective to be, because we have a great seat at that table, and we have a voice which really is helpful to what we're trying to get done at Mile Auto.
Naomi, what about you?
Thank you, Kathy. So before I get started, I have to give the official disclaimer that everything I say today is my personal opinion and not that of my current or former employers. So,
nothing like a great attorney to be on this panel.
You know what? Very happy to be here. So in the world at Berkeley, we're very decentralized. So as you had mentioned, I support a variety of the Berkeley businesses throughout the United States. We have 4 separate operating units, and each one of those has its own structure, a president, its own claims department, its own underwriting department. And because of that, we are comprised of a lot of smaller groups. And that allows for, similarly to what Scott was saying, a lot of communication among those groups. There aren't a lot of layers, a lot of silos to get through. And so strategically, claims will interact with the president, the business side, the actuaries, to help contribute to get to the best outcomes for the company in all lines of business. And then one of my roles is to help understand what's going on there so I can facilitate that on a more high-level global approach to it. But I think the key is really to have claims at the table. And I've been fortunate to work at a company where that's encouraged and collaboration is encouraged, and claims is viewed as an equal partner. And that's what I think is so critical to this function of being at the table for strategic development.
Well, and I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize the role that technology plays in enabling the collaboration and also the claims process itself. Joe, can you share with us how technology, and in particular emerging technologies, actually are impacting strategy at Mile Auto?
Sure. Thanks, Kathy. And yeah, technology is certainly a big piece of the equation. I want to echo what Scott and Naomi both said about claims having an equal seat at the table, because we think that's critically important, certainly at Mile Auto. And so we have actually integrated technology throughout our operations process, starting from our initial contact with a customer or an agent through getting a quote, all the way through the process of underwriting, managing the policy, servicing claims, and so on. And one of the ways that we've been able to apply technology to do that is we actually have our own in-house integrated policy management system that handles that entire process from end to end. So we do have the ability to apply new technology very quickly. We've certainly done that with our mileage-based or pay-per-mile auto insurance product, and the way that we're using technology to capture mileage, the way that we're applying technology all the way through in the claims process in terms of adjusting claims and getting claims paid quickly. But I think from our standpoint, we look at the strategy aspect of technology as something that we want to be sure is enhancing the consumer experience from start to finish, as well as from a back office standpoint, helping us manage the business as efficiently as we can.
So I would be remiss if I didn't bring up where we are right now with COVID. I mean, all of us have watched the news. We've had to fundamentally change our business processes. Many of the companies, work from home has been, maybe it's an opportunity for some. It's been a disaster for others. Let's talk a little bit about how this has changed processes for organizations and what's been going on. And Joe, I'm going to just go right to you. What's happened?
Sure. Well, what's been great for us, frankly, Kathy, at Mile Auto is that, we're a new company. We're an early stage company, been in business just for about 3 years now. But we built the company from the beginning to be a virtual organization. So We have different offices and different locations around the country, but everything we have done is built to be operating in a virtual environment. So with the change of COVID and having some people transitioning to work from home, some of our staff who already worked from home, it was a very easy and seamless transition for us to be able to do that with really no change to our operations at all.
That's interesting because you pay for, my understanding is that you pay premium based on the number of miles you drive, correct?
That's right. That's right.
You've got technology to validate that?
We sure do. So from a product standpoint, and that's a great point, thanks for bringing it up, Kathy, for our customers, people who are driving less because they are working from home or their commuting patterns have changed, are really only paying for insurance based on the number of miles they drive. So at Mile Auto, it's a pay-per-mile product, and we don't use plug-in devices or black box tracking or anything like that. We actually have a computer vision and artificial intelligence-based technology that uses odometer photos that are provided by our customers to actually measure their monthly mileage, and then they're billed on that basis each month. So it's kind of a post-paid model for auto insurance based on the miles driven.
So your policyholders aren't getting a refund check is what you're telling me.
Well, I guess the good news is they don't need to wait for a refund check. They're actually getting a discount every day and every week as their driving habits change.
Fair enough. Naomi, what about your company? How did this affect Berkeley?
Well, I think because we have a very diverse book, including commercial property, workers' comp, liability, EPLI, we've seen a lot of different claims come in, COVID-related claims. Our strategy, though, how to approach those has not changed. We're still taking the same strategy, but the biggest challenge for us has been transitioning to a work-from-home environment. And traditionally in the Berkeley world, we have not been certainly not a full-time work-from-home in claims. Each operating unit has their own processes, and so I think we had to be very nimble and agile to redesign some of our technology services within our company to allow us to work remotely, and it's been a big success. So I'm happy to say we were able to make those changes. But I think from the claims customer standpoint or claimant standpoint, they haven't seen any changes other than adjusting to do things differently to make it easier for them. So more communication by email, whereas it might have been, in addition to letters going out, things to make it easier to interact with the claimants and the customers to help process the claims and not be delayed because we couldn't get access to whatever the site was.
So what about all the noise around whether or not you're liable or you're going to have to pay for some of these claims, that are COVID related? How long do you think those are going to tie up resources, if you will? I mean, there's been a lot of noise, right? Let's just put that out there.
There's a lot of noise, and at least for the COVID property business interruption claims, there is a lot of litigation out there, and that could be a whole other panel discussion. There are several hundreds of cases that have been filed throughout the United States seeking business interruption coverage based on partial shutdowns, complete government shutdowns, and there's an MDL, multi-district litigation panel that's going to decide whether to take the cases in later this month. But I think while the claims came in fast and furious on the property claims, March, April, May, they started to dwindle off. And now what we expect to see is an increase in workers' comp claims and crisis claims and employment practices claims as businesses start reopening, people start returning to work throughout the country. And so I think all the property claims, or most of them, have come in. People started filing them right away. But I think the litigation, may go on for a couple of years, if not longer. And we'll see. It's going to lead to some really interesting conversations. And at least in the property world, it's a challenge that would impact the industry as a whole, were there to be coverage for a lot of these claims.
So, Scott, are you seeing any differences as a result of COVID, or anticipating any technologies in particular that you're going to use for collaboration with claims in other areas. Can you shed a little light on those to make the
That's a great
approaches for
question.
claims?
Sure, that's a great question. Thank you. We have always, I think the whole industry has endeavored to try to build speed into our equation when it comes to serving the customer. The thing that COVID has brought about is, it's actually probably enhanced our speed, because as the consumer now wants less human touch, they want that contactless claim. We're able to bring some things to bear on our claim. Like we've partnered with a great company called Adjustify, and for us, they're great technology because they have some photo imaging technology as well as video technology. So we can collaborate in real time at the either scene of the accident, in the driveway, or if it's a property claim at a building, we can collaborate in real time using this new technology that's touchless from this Adjustify, where we can actually have an appointment, talk to our customer on the phone, turn their camera around while it's in their hand, and I can do the video and I can take the photos that I need to document the damage. And the consumer, I want to shout out to Adjustify because they've been a big help to us, and they're great. They're just a great resource. But it enables, right? So we give them that, and the old school way of it, you would put someone out in the field to go out and look at a car or look at a building, or do that today, and it's actually kind of rare given our environment. So the technology that we're employing today is a lot different because of COVID, and I don't see that going away. I think it's enhanced our business. So we're going to continue to look at technology and ways to speed up the claims process and make it easier on the customer.
What about you, Naomi? Have there been any specific technologies that you've used or seen used because of work from home that have changed the way you guys do business?
Not so much on the claims handling side, just more on our infrastructure side. So because we did not have a lot of remote workers or work from home workers, we had to make some changes to the way we do our video conferencing. So we always had we had WebEx, we still have WebEx, but we've switched to a different platform. And I don't know the tech parameters around that, but we had some issues with our phones and our phones dialing into our computers and how to forward your regular phone to your cell phone. And our IT department, within a couple of days, globally, kind of figured out how to make all that work. And so kudos to them, because the first couple of days we were all working from home, everything was crashing. It was just overloading the servers. So I don't know what changes they made, but I do know that they must have been working around the clock, because within a few days, it was seamless. And now when I talk to people, they don't know that I'm not in my office. They call my computer and we're off to the races.
Yeah, I think one of the things I like best about Zoom is you can have all those backgrounds that look like you're really somewhere, very professional, and you could be on the beach, who knows.
That's a good point.
So I'm going to shift here. We're going to talk a little bit more about technology as we move throughout the session, but I actually want to go back and talk about some of the strategic challenges organizations face. So we're going to do a real quick audience poll. And so if I can please have us take a audience poll on the 3 top strategic challenges that organizations are going to face in the next 3 to 5 years. So if we could please put those questions up, I'd appreciate it. Question number 1. I'm hoping it can be seen. I'm not able to see it, so. Are you able to see it?
I think in the chat, Kathy, people are saying they don't see the poll.
Okay, so if you give me just a second, Massey will get it up for us, I'm hoping.
Yes, just give us 2 seconds.
Oh, okay, thank you. You know what? It's awesome when you say their name. Magically
There it is.
appears.
It's up now.
Yeah, all you
There
have
it
to do
is.
is say Massey, and it's a miracle. We've got it. So the idea here is just select 3, and we're just taking a poll and seeing what you as claims leaders and professionals think. And there's no right answer. It's just a snapshot of where we are in time. And as you're doing that, I'd like to go ahead and start asking our panelists the same question. So in this case, Naomi, let's begin with you. Looking ahead, what do you see is the top strategic challenges that companies are going to face?
Well, one of them that comes to mind pretty quickly to me are things that deal with managing privacy issues. Because the landscape of privacy, both within the United States and for us internationally, where we do have a lot of business, is continually changing. And the types of data that businesses and others are collecting about people is constantly changing. Even within the United States, it varies so much. Like, for example, biometric data. There's some litigation in Illinois right now about biometric data and storage of biometric data and penalties if you don't disclose certain things to your employees, people who time clock punch in with a fingerprint. So things like that concern me, both for insuring our insureds and what they might be liable for, and are we underwriting and pricing correctly for those risks, as well as are we as claims and claims organizations managing that data properly, especially as data gets stored in various places and data may be moved across different states, depending where you are working on your claim file and where the server is. Or across international boundaries. And I think it's really important for claims to work with compliance and IT to make sure that everything that the claims people are doing complies with all of that. But since it's such a shifting landscape, I think it presents a lot more challenges today than it did 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Okay, Joe, I'm not letting you off the hook on this one. Jump in here. This begs data strategy, technology, and investments that people never want to talk about, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Kathy. And I'll jump on what Naomi said as well. There is a lot of data out there. The landscape is definitely changing. The regulations are changing. And so I would maybe divide it into 2 different categories. One category, obviously, from a technology standpoint, deals directly with the issue of data security and making sure that any personal data you have, any PCI compliance issues you have, all those issues need to be taken care of, HIPAA compliance issues, and so on. One of the great things I think that's been happening from a technology standpoint is that the tools for implementing security as well as for auditing security have just taken leaps and bounds over the past decade or so. So our ability as the people responsible for managing and securing that data has gotten much easier, frankly, than it used to be in the past. So even with the changing landscape, there is that challenge of keeping up with things, but the tools are so much better now than they used to be that it really does become much more of a manageable issue. I think the second piece of that really deals with the kinds of data that you are collecting, how you're getting your customers aware of what that data is and how that data is potentially used. And I can just kind of share a brief anecdote kind of back in the earlier days of working in the usage-based insurance field and having things that were measuring driver behavior and kind of breadcrumbing where and when people were driving and so on. We used to get in a prior company subpoenas for driver data having nothing to do with insurance, but having to do with things like child custody cases and divorce cases where you have a plaintiff who wants to know where their spouse has been sleeping at night, or are they going to the bar when they're on their way home from work and picking up the kids and so on. So there's a whole layer of privacy-related issues that sort of involve insurance because of the data that we may be collecting, but actually have nothing to do with insurance. And frankly, That's one reason why at Mile Auto, we opted to make our usage-based product strictly based on mileage and not dealing with driver behavior, tracking where and when people are with their vehicles, just because we don't want to be involved in those sorts of issues. But they are definitely out there, and it is a kind of a real challenge.
So, Scott, as we think about claims, and, I'm putting you on the spot here, as we think about claims and we think about budgets, you've got this great project that you want to have implemented, and you need money to do so. And you build a business case, and it is going to save the company all kinds of money in claims, but you're having to compete for dollars for privacy. How do you make a pitch? How do you get the money you need? They've got, you may or may not. I mean, you've got to comply with some law, and you've got to comply with regulatory issues. How do you compete? How do you deal with the strategic ramifications that to be in this business in today's age, you're going to have to be able to do? What do you do? What would you say?
Sure. So thank you for that question.
Sure. I'm going to kill her. Don't worry, I'll get you two later.
It's a good question. I think the issue is about prioritizing, where you're going to spend. And really, it's not just a claims issue, it's a departmental issue. So different groups within the organization vie for those same dollars that you need to spend in order to be compliant, in order to protect privacy and do the things that we need to do. So really, it's about, for us, it's about prioritizing kind of what has the biggest impact, what's Did you catch that?
I'm having a little bit of a technical issue. I don't know if you guys are or not.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah, so maybe if we can get some help there, that would be good. But what I heard is that it's about looking at what do we need to do, prioritizing the critical issues that need to be completed in order to get the job done, and making a decision and allocating resources to ensure that we're in compliance, but yet making sure that we have enough to invest in innovation.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope I bailed you out on that one.
Absolutely. No, that's
so
right.
Anyway,
that's
Naomi, what about
that's right.
What
that's
about
right.
your perspective on that? Because I mean, the pie is only so big.
I think the issue about like the privacy and the data and all of that, I agree with my colleagues on this panel. It does cross over other departments besides claims. So there is data that underwriting keeps. There is, data about our own employees. So I think from a resource perspective and allocation perspective, Kathy, it's, of course, you're always fighting for the same pie, the dollars in the pie and budgeting that. But it gets a lot of support, at least where I am, from other organizations, because the last thing we want to be is out of compliance and facing some of these fines. So we're international as well. And some of these national fines are a lot of money each day that you're not in compliance, that something has gone awry. So it's treated as a very high level, like a table stakes issue for us, that we have to get that right. And I'm assuming it's the same with Scott and Joe. We want to do it the best, most efficient way, but it's something that we can't really afford to get wrong.
So, Joe, with this, how do you stay ahead of all this technology, and what kind of strategic challenges does that present for companies?
Well, that's another great question, of course. And I think one of the most difficult things, frankly, for me and the folks in my particular organization at Mile is kind of separating out a lot of the noise around technology from the things that are really important to the business and that we need to be focused on, because there's a lot of, and I say noise not in a pejorative sense, that there are things that aren't worthwhile or aren't important, but there are so many things that potentially you could be looking at or getting involved in. You really do have to say, well, what are the things that are going to be most important and impactful for us right now? And Kathy, you had mentioned, budget as one constraint, and definitely I think, we're a new organization. That's certainly a constraint for us. It's a constraint for any organization. I would say one of the other big constraints, particularly in the IT area, is just time. There are only so many resources that we have available. There's only so many things you can get done. So again, that all gets back to the issue of just prioritizing. And I think from a strategic standpoint, it's saying, we have these 20 projects that we could do, all of which can be justified and be seen as important from a strategic standpoint for the business. But which two are we going to attack first? And that's the biggest challenge that we have.
You know what? One of the things that I have learned since I left Nationwide and worked with other carriers is there's an underlying assumption that big carriers have a lot more resources that they can focus and reallocate. The reality is there's a group of people that have the skills and capabilities necessary to get the job done, right? Mm-hmm. And they're precious resources, and it's the same problem that you have, even though your company may be smaller. Mm-hmm. It's where do you dedicate those people? You can only spread them so thin.
Right.
So let's see if our results from our survey are up. Macy, did we have those done yet? Hopefully.
We do indeed, Kathy, yes.
Thank you.
The results from the poll are in, and they indicate that the top 3 greatest strategic challenges, according to our audience, are the changing consumer expectations, talent shortage, and cybersecurity.
No surprise there. Absolutely no surprise there. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is the changing consumer expectations. I mean, this is where claims really makes a big difference, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Claims has the ability to see what they are day in and day out. Wouldn't you agree, Scott? I mean, you listen to customers, you talk to customers, you interact with them daily. Naomi, you deal with their complaints.
Yeah, absolutely. And their expectations are, when they call in a claim to our department, they just want to be taken. They want to be taken care of in an efficient manner. And so what we do in claims is we are kind of the gatekeeper when it comes to what tactics or resources or, technology we will employ and deploy to help service that customer. And I think our position in claims is serious enough that you can't just deploy all the resources, all the new buzzwords out there from a technology standpoint. You have to kind of go back to the budget, and you have to kind of utilize the resources that are going to serve your customer, that you're going to be able to deliver in control kind of severity. You don't want to employ tactics that are going to increase your frequency. And so I think there's a real challenge from a claims perspective to do it the right way, to only use the resources that are really going to move your claim forward and move your company forward. And not all technology is going to be great technology for you. Some of it's going to create problems, might create leakage. So I think it's important on the back end, no matter what technology we employ or deploy, I think it's super important to measure it going into that technology and measure it coming out of that technology so we know the impact. And if there's true leakage from something we're employing because maybe it's quicker, it's faster, it's more friendlier, if there's leakage on the severity or the indemnity side, we need to be able to see that. We need to be able to employ a stopgap measure that would stop that. And I think there's a few moving pieces to technology and claims that I think a lot of folks want to jump to it. But I think you got to be really careful. You got to be thoughtful. You got to be strategic in what you use, what you employ and deploy. And is it helping your bottom line?
Well, and you know what? And also
some of the things we wrestled with.
The words that I chose at the beginning, deliberately designed, those were really important words. If you don't leave with anything that I said today, remember those 2 words, because deliberately designed means some thought goes into the process with metrics, so you know what you began with and what you end with. So with that, one of the things that we tend to do in strategy is think about trends. And so, when I'm thinking about trends and looking at, what's going on right now, for example, are there any trends in claims that you think are going to shape the future of the insurance industry? And Naomi, let's start with you.
Oh, thank you, Kathy. So One of the trends, and this kind of ties in a little bit to the shifting demographic and changing consumer expectations issue that was highlighted, that I'm starting to see, and I'm curious to hear my colleagues think as well, has to do with social inflation. And just to level set so we're all on the same page, when I'm talking about social inflation, I'm talking about the impact of changes in the tort reform, in the tort world, not just tort reform, that increases the amount for which we're able to settle various liability claims, auto, premises, other types of claims. And these changes can include things like propensity to sue, increased positive feelings about litigation, or jury attitudes on negligence or award sizes, effective judicial appointments, changes in legislation like reform, changes in theories of tort and legal negligence. And tort reform has been around for the past 15, 20 years or so. I'm sure we're all familiar with that. At the same time, verdicts have been escalating. And I think that escalating verdict is really shifting how we value and evaluate claims so we can achieve what we think is a reasonable settlement in the claims world. Part of that ties into the diminished value of money, and that what people think of as $1 million today is not the same as what people thought of as $1 million 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even 5 years ago. So some of the reasons I think that are behind these escalating verdicts have to do with an overall distrust in corporations and corporate America. People have shorter attention spans. I've heard that people have attention spans, for 5 seconds, 7 seconds now. It's very different in our society where everything's bombarding you with our phones, all our devices, social media, YouTube. And the impact of social media, not just attention spans, but also when there's a big verdict, everybody hears about it. Or if your college friend's aunt got some judgment about something, you're going to hear about these things through Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook. I guess people still use Facebook, at least in my generation. So the impact of social media kind of feeds into this frenzy with attorney advertisements and things where you involved on the TV, were you involved in this? Was someone exposed to, talc powder or things like that? And also the lottery mentality. Everyone in America deserves to be a millionaire. Everyone deserves to hit that winning lottery ticket. And that impacts the jury. So those 6 to 12 people that are sitting in that box deciding the case against your insured, those are the things, the biases that they have going in, which I believe is actually driving up value and is making it harder for us to settle claims where we think the reasonable value is or was, is now skyrocketing much faster than the cost of inflation, cost of living increases, and things like that. One other factor I think that's buying into that social inflation has to do with litigation financing. And I don't know if everyone is familiar with litigation financing, but that's where a third party provides financial resources to enable costly litigation or arbitration cases to proceed. And they will fund, usually there's some amount they'll pay the lawyer's bills, but they also will give money to the plaintiff. And so the litigant gets some or all of the financing to cover their legal costs from a private commercial litigation funder who has no other interest in the proceedings. All they're doing is doing their risk assessment and deciding, is this worthy for them to invest? What's the return they'll get on the other side? If the case is won, the funder gets a percentage of the proceeds. And if the case is lost, then the funder gets nothing and the litigant doesn't have to pay them back. So I was wondering if we could put up poll question number 2, Masi?
Yes, it'll be coming up just now.
Okay, thank you. So
Naomi, while he's putting that up, do they have any say in the attorney that's used? Do the financiers have any say?
So the question is up. Let me read the question and then I'll go back to that.
Okay.
So the question is, I'm just curious if you're seeing this as well and how many claims you, the audience, have been involved with where a litigation financing company agreement was used. So 0, and then it goes up to more than 25 with some choices in between. That's, Kathy, back to your question. That's a really interesting question. Typically, the attorney already is involved. They might try to bring someone else in to associate. one of the big ethical issues around this is, well, who is directing the litigation? Because this litigation financing company, they're not lawyers. They don't represent the insurers or the claimants or the plaintiff as lawyers. They can't really provide legal advice. But at the same time, their presence does have an impact on whether the case is going to settle or not, or whether the claimant will risk going to a jury, because you no longer have the issue of the claimant who maybe has $500,000 in medical bills not being reimbursed and may not be made totally whole, but they are put in a better place. So their incentive to settle has shifted. It shifted the landscape a lot, and that's where some courts have said you can't go along with this. However, the landscape, I feel, is going the other way, and they are becoming more prevalent throughout the United States. Litigation finance in 2012 was used in about 10% of cases, and it was at least 32% in 2018. And I don't have data more recent than that. So I think it is on the upward shift. It's viewed by these litigation financing companies as another investment risk. So it might be case by case, like what you were saying, do they pick the attorney? More frequently, it's on a portfolio basis. So it's several cases or a bunch of cases, unless it's some really high severity case that they just can't fund and they're going to take that risk. But these companies have like a committee that evaluates, and almost like we underwrite insurance, and they look at the risk and decide what they're going to pay and what they're willing to do and how much risk they're going to take. And obviously they're going to win some, they're going to lose some, but
or it could be like junk bonds, right?
Right. They factored that in. So like I said, I do think that is also having an impact on social inflation, because you have claims that may have been more amenable to settlement, whether it's with some kind of annuity structure or something else, that are no longer way. And the plaintiffs bar, especially in the bodily injury world, they are becoming more and more creative, trying to get to these big verdicts, because the more big ones that they get in social inflation will continue to drive the verdicts up. Masi, do we have the poll results?
We do indeed, yes. So the question, the polling question was, how many claims have you been involved with where a litigation funding agreement was utilized? And the results suggest that over 60% have selected 0. Over 15% have selected 5 or less.
Okay.
And just under 10% have selected 25 or less, or 10 or less.
Okay. So one thing I would say is I believe these numbers may be skewed a little bit, because the existence of a litigation funding agreement is not always discovered. So this would be where we're aware of it, and where either somebody slipped and mentioned it, or a court said, yes, you have to produce it. What we are doing in our organization is, when we suspect there's something out there, we pushed very hard on discovery, just so we know, because we think it's only fair to know what's driving the other side if there's another factor. And we've been met with moderate success. So I think the more of us that try to push the issue of getting these discovered, if you suspect they're out there, I believe there will be some traction in them being produced, and trying to level that playing field of understanding who's driving the litigation.
Well, with all the claims professionals in the room today, maybe we can start asking that question, as part of the claims process. Scott, what about other trends that you're seeing? Are there any that you think are of significance?
I would point back more to, I would just support what Naomi just said. It was, she kind of hammered that. And I think, I think it's more prevalent, especially the last piece she talked about, probably more prevalent than we realize. As far as trends that are developing that I see, I just, everywhere I go, every conference I attend, there's always more technology that's on the horizon that's coming in. And so, the trend that really COVID brought to our doorstep, I think, is, and you got to remember, I grew up in as an adjuster in the 80s. That's when I started, for God's sakes. And, so I'm dating myself, but I would go out and meet people with manual estimates. I would handwrite estimates, and technology has come so far. And I think there's so much of it out there that you really got to weed through it. Whether or not there's one in particular, I think COVID-19 has really brought the contactless claim more to the surface than it was in the past. We were all, doing claims from photos and things that were convenient for the customer. But like I mentioned earlier, I always worry about leakage on things that we're not putting our hands on. If I can't send someone out to look at some property damage or a car face to face, and it's significant damage, you're risking real leakage there. And there's technology that can help safeguard some of that, but it's always hard to replace the actual appraiser out at the vehicle. So I think just weeding through the field of technology that's out there that you can employ is really the biggest thing that's going to challenge us. But in terms of what technology, machine learning, AI, all of that's, if you can bring it to bear on your organization, it's going to save you so much time and resources. But you got to balance that with what we were talking about earlier, the cost of doing that, the IT resources, and the impact on your maybe your frequency and your severity. You've got to weigh all that together. But I think technology, of course, is here to stay. I think COVID-19 has really pushed it to the forefront, especially the contactless claims. Customers like that, and I don't know if that's going to change in the next couple of years. I mean, I think that's here to stay.
So, Joe, what about you? What trends do you see on the horizon that are going to shape claims?
Actually, I'm going to commit a bit of heresy here probably and say that, I think that the hype around the impact that technology can have on claims is probably well overdone at this point. And again, I'm probably committing some heresy by saying that. But so I'll take as one example the move towards the contactless claim. I think that's all great, but let's talk about remote adjusting of claims right now, and a point that Scott made earlier about kind of balancing between the capabilities of the technology and the impact that has on the other core parts of your business. So, for example, there's an insurtech company out there right now. I won't mention their name, but they're very well known, who talks about as one of their key value propositions for customers how fast they're able to settle a claim. So if you have a claim, we can settle that claim and you'll have your payment in 2 minutes. So I think from a consumer standpoint, that's great. It's a great kind of talking point for this insurtech to tout. But I think the reality is if you're suffering a significant amount of leakage on the back end for what you're paying on a claim because you're offering that kind of turnaround, what you're doing is you're creating an expectation on the part of consumers that this is the way that claims should be done, but you're doing that on a foundation that's just not sustainable from an insurance and claims paying and loss ratio standpoint. So that kind of thing can continue for a time in the marketplace, but ultimately it's going to crumble, and either the insurer is going to get crushed or the consumer is going to be greatly disappointed, or both. And I just don't think that that's a good thing for the industry. So it's kind of the difference between what you can do and what is really productive for the entire ecosystem to do. And frankly, I think that claims is kind of suffering from a little bit of that overhyped technology thing currently. That's just Joe's opinion, not Miloto's opinion, not anybody else's opinion to leverage on Naomi's disclaimer. That's just my opinion.
No, it's fair. I mean, every claim is different, and customers have different expectations too. And depending on the type of claim it is, maybe it shouldn't be settled quickly. Mm-hmm. Maybe people need some hand-holding and some compassion. And maybe it needs to be investigated for liability. And you don't want that settled in 2 minutes.
Right.
Sometimes the customer needs to be heard. So it's been suggested that some companies are starting to dedicate more of their claims resources to helping policyholders prevent their losses. To actually, looking in their houses with the Internet of Things, preventing losses with, their cars, leveraging technology to help them become better drivers with smart appliances, interfaces. Naomi, Scott, Joe, what are your points of view on that? Do you think it's just consulting pushing an idea, or is this a new wave for people to start thinking about?
I'll jump in, I guess. With changing demographics and our reliance on technology and smart devices, and our cars are all computerized now, and so there's an ability to do different things now than we could do many years ago, and especially as millennials and Gen Z and future generations come in, I think it's going to have some appeal, and we'll gain some traction with them, especially if it can be tied to some kind of premium discount or certain other things that will tie in monetarily. And if it makes it easier for the customer, whether it's in getting their policy underwritten or with handling their claim, I think it will gain a lot of traction with them. But from our perspective, and I want to hear what Joe and Scott think, how do we think this will impact value both for the customer and for us as the carrier? Because we have to weigh both of those, right? We want it to be easy for the customer. We want them to gain loyalty and feel good about their claims experience with us. But will it have value for us as well on the back end? And that's the piece that I'm kind of struggling with, and would love to hear what you guys have to think about that as well.
Scott.
Sure. I'll jump in there real quick. Hey, I think it's got value, and I think it all comes down to education, right? So how are we communicating to the customer? How are we getting this information to them from a claims perspective? And what are our touch points throughout the buy process and then into the claim? At every touch point, if we can communicate in a way that gives them resources that they can call upon should they have a claim, I think that's the first thing that we've got to do is use the channels of communication that we currently have open with the customer. So that could be at the point of purchase, that could be online at our site. There's a few different touch points that we at Mile Auto try to use to enhance that communication. I do like the idea of putting together something that's an educational communicative piece where if a customer goes through it, almost like a driving course. If a customer goes through it, they get some kind of small discount or some kind of favorability thing with us on the policy purchase or on their premium. We have not gone that far with it at Mile Auto yet, but I think in this vein, from a claims perspective, we have not committed a lot of our resources to the educational piece. I think it's a good idea, but I'm not sure it just needs to come from claims. I think it needs to be more of a corporate overriding thing because, and I'll speak for all the claims people on the call today that, claims can sometimes have a resource issue. So we want to keep our people face to face with the consumer, whether it be via phone, in person, whatever the customer wants. We want to do that and if we have the resources to do that, I think it needs to come more from the corporate side, because claims can sometimes be drained of available resources. So that's just my perspective.
Joe.
Yeah. Here again, kind of squarely on the fence about some of these issues. I do think that that education for consumers about how to prevent claims is a very, very good thing to do. And I think the more of that we as an industry can do to help advise customers on that, I mean, that's a win-win for everybody, right? The insurers want less claims, and of course the insured don't want to have a claim. So all that kind of works together. I think where it becomes a little bit tricky is when you're kind of getting back to the data collection issue, and when you're collecting data from a customer and saying, well, we're going to use this data to help advise you on how to be a better driver, on how to avoid this kind of claim or that kind of claim. But then at the moment you have a claim, if the insurer turns around and uses that data to say, well, in this instance, you weren't being a very safe driver, therefore we have an issue with your claim. I think that where you start to get that tension between the two ends, and you have to figure out how to balance that. I think from our standpoint at Mile as a company, we try to be all about transparency, right? We want people to know what data we're collecting, how that data is going to be used, how it's not going to be used, so that they know what to expect. I think the other aspect of that, and Naomi would certainly have more to chime in on this point, is that, you know, we found sometimes with insureds that no matter what you tell them, no matter what the language in their policy is, when push comes to shove, if you put that insured with a plaintiff's attorney in front of a judge and in front of a jury, and they say, well, I thought that I was giving you this information for this purpose, and even though it clearly says, but we can use it for these other things, they're saying, well, I didn't understand that, or that wasn't really what I thought was going to happen. That just creates another issue. So I think we have to be really careful to balance those.
I agree with that. And I think going back kind of to what Scott said about which function of the business this would come from, I think it's another danger of having that within the claims team. So in my world, it's the same reason when we have additional insureds or coverage and liability issues, we split the files, right? So that the claim handlers can focus on what their obligation is to the insured in adjusting that one claim and not these other peripheral matters. And if there are coverage issues, the liability adjuster isn't brought into that, right? So they don't know about this other information that may have come out. I agree with that. It does create some issues, and maybe, you know, where it belongs more in the underwriting area, separate files that aren't accessible from the person who's handling the claim. And I think just one other thing that popped into mind as we were talking about this is, even with all this technology and resources and learning, I think fundamentally everything comes back to that interaction between the insured and the claims department. And that's, technology is never going to replace, or shouldn't, in my opinion, replace that ability to be able to pick up the phone or email, get to that one person who's handling your claim. And that, how that claim is handled, is what's going to impact the relationship with the insured down the road.
So the one thing that we haven't really talked about today, and I wish we had time to talk about, is the culture of strategy and the culture of leadership, and leadership making a difference in fostering innovation and change. One of the things that I think is really critical to having an agile organization is having the right leaders in place in the claims organization that encourage innovation and encourage change. We've got time for one question that I'm going to throw at each one of you, and then we're going to get into the questions that the audience has. If you could make one change in your organization, or not your organization, but just in general, what do you think claims ought to be doing different? And I'm going to start this time with Joe.
Boy, I think, if there were one organizational change, I think that I would have, let me frame the answer this way. In our organization, when we as executives in the organization want to get closer to the customer and understand what the customer is thinking, generally our first thought is we're going to go to the customer care team. So we're going to go to customer service and the folks who are kind of at the front end of the process. I think in a sense, the claims team needs to be viewed as every bit as valuable a resource for that point of customer connection and feedback as your customer care team would be, because they have a deeper interaction maybe with fewer customers, but the depth of that interaction is extremely valuable in getting information back into the organization. So I think that's one change that I would make.
Naomi.
So mine is not identical, but a similar type of thought. It's not an issue in my organization, but I've heard from colleagues this frequently, and it's that, when claims is not viewed as an equal partner and not utilized as a resource, there's so much information from the claims group about the customer, about trends, all sorts of things that can impact the rest of the business. And if claims is not viewed to be on equal par with the others, I think it really diminishes claims willingness to bring issues up to management, underwriting, actuarial, and throughout the organization. And so as an industry, I think if that were to shift, it would actually have a great improvement on everybody's experience overall.
Awesome. That's so true. That's so true. And Scott, we're going to end with you.
Sure. So first, I would just reiterate what both Joe and Naomi said there. I think those are great points. I think from I'll talk from a little bit different angle, more of an inside claims guy. So, I grew up in claims and spent my life 30 years doing this. So my experience has been varying at different companies. So I've worked for a couple carriers, a big carrier, a small carrier, and a mid-sized carrier. And one of the biggest things that I found is, as a claims leader, you need to build trust and transparency throughout the organization. It has to start with you, and it's got to bleed down to your managers, to your leaders, and to your frontline people. And what I mean by that is a lot of claims organizations, adjusters are afraid to maybe speak the truth, to admit when they've made a mistake. And so I think it's a leadership issue. I once had a guy hide a file in California when I worked out there in the ceiling tiles because it was a bad faith file that he had messed up. But it was terrible. We actually found it after hours. But I mean, anybody on the phone that's in claims has seen crazy stuff. But I tell you, I took that personally, and that was my first experience with it, where I realized that failure was really my failure because I didn't create an environment where that individual felt like he could make a mistake or at least talk about it. And it actually cost us more money because it was hidden. And so we as leaders, I think, need to create an environment where I don't need to be everybody's friend as a leader, but I need to make sure people that work within the organization feel like they can, tell me anything in terms of a claim. And we need to expect mistakes. We need not to use audit as a punitive tool. So if I'm going to audit an adjuster, it's a life cycle claim, meaning I'm going to find out your errors. I'm going to teach you what you did wrong. I'm going to come alongside you and show you how to improve upon that. And then if I need to, I'm going to bring training alongside of that so that you can come full circle and really grow and learn from mistakes that you made. But what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to hit you over the head for that. And I think in claims, and because I've lived in claims in a few different organizations, I think we have a tendency to make claims punitive. We have a tendency internally to kind of become a closed-off organization where the staff that works for us isn't really willing to vocalize mistakes. And I think it's our job as leaders to create an environment where that open dialogue, that candid conversation can take place. And the adjuster needs to know that, hey, I'm going to make mistakes and it's okay to talk to my leader about it. And for me, so it's a little bit different perspective. That's kind of what I think we would need to do from a leadership perspective to create an environment where we can have that going on. I think it's a learning environment, and I think it would improve the organization.
Well, taking the time to make those types of systemic changes is one of the most important strategic moves that you can make. And guess what? It can be done at relatively little cost if the leadership team is willing to do so. So let's take a look at some of the questions. The first one that we have here is, with the rise in nuclear verdicts, it looks like this one might go to Naomi. Is there anything claims professionals can do to help prevent the claim from getting to the lawsuit stage? Or maybe not. What do you guys think?
I'm happy to jump in first unless...
Okay.
So I think one thing that I think about is, if a plaintiff's lawyer is intent on suing, there's nothing you're going to do that's going to prevent them from bringing the litigation. So even if you're willing to, I guess, unless you just tender the policy limits early, and they still might take issue with that if their goal is to try to bring a lawsuit and maybe pop open the limits and expose the carrier. But my advice would be is to have your best practices in place, handle all your claims the same way, be proactive, but to also think about the value of a claim today not being the same as it was 2, 3, 4 years ago, and maybe approaching how you reserve it, how you evaluate it, and how you proactively approach settlement with whether it's an unrepresented claimant or a claimant's attorney. But one thing I tell The people I support all the time is, we'll get into a big dispute. There's a demand for policy limits. And then they say, well, how do we stop them from suing us for bad faith if we don't accept the limits? And what I've said to senior management is I can't stop them from bringing the lawsuit. What I would like is to have a good file, a defensible file that we adhere to our practices, reasonable evaluations. If we do all of those things, we will be able to defend and not be an easy target. And I think that's important, kind of goes along with what Scott was saying. We're not out to blame people for not resolving the claim, but it's really important that people are trained well and supported. And look, if a mistake was made, a mistake was made in evaluating the claim. But how do we react when that comes to light? Most importantly, it's to be proactive. But honestly, unless you're paying every claim with what somebody demands, regardless of how you evaluate it, there will be lawsuits in our business. So I think it's how do we best manage that, approach it, and have our claims professionals adjust, reserve, evaluate the claims, and be supported in those decisions.
Scott, you want to add to that?
Yeah, it's hard to follow Naomi because she's good, but I would just add my little perspective. I would start by saying everything she said was right on, and then I would just say that, I think you've got to have some layers of help built in above the adjuster, which I think Berkeley and every organization out there does. It's good practice to have a few eyes look at that evaluation. It's good practice to look at the attorney demand to make sure you're not being set up. And the old classic cases, they would always want to try to set up the adjuster who was new and didn't know what he was doing. And again, that comes down to us as leaders. We need to have something built in that we can have two or three people looking at it and saying, yeah, this is a good evaluation. Let's move forward with it. And then like Naomi, where we did a great job, the evaluation was fair, and they're still coming after us. And I think she's right. If you build the case file, you do it the right way, it's defensible. And that's what an attorney wants on our side. Our attorney wants us to be able to defend our decision. And I think if we can do that, then we're all in good shape. And like Naomi said, the plaintiff bar, it's constant, it's powerful. They're always wanting to try to hit one out of the park on you, and you gotta have enough safeguards, training, and procedures in place that everyone follows them. And I think you can safely secure kind of your end result on that file if you do a good job throughout.
So Joe, I'm going to let you answer this last question, and we won't be able to get to the other three, but I promise you, those that submitted them, I will get back to you with answers on them. I think I can answer all three of the ones that are left individually, but the one that was asked, we talk about the importance of claims technology. Are there any particular types of technology that are having a strong impact on the claims process? And so we'll end with you answering that.
Great. Okay, thanks. I'll try to make it a good one. So notwithstanding my comments earlier about the overuse of technology or overhyping of it, I think there are two areas that have really been and continue to have a big impact on claims. One is the use of photo-based and video technology in order to at least be able to start the claims process, to be able to get some information in front of an adjuster more quickly, so they can start to assess the severity of a claim, provide better service to the insured, et cetera. I think the second area is in the area of payment, and just streamlining the entire process, kind of the nuts and bolts or the plumbing, if you will, of actually getting the claim resolved and getting that payment to the customer as quickly as possible so that we can start to get them back on their feet or make them whole, whatever the issue is with the particular claim. So I think those are two areas that have had a big impact.
Yeah.
Well, to the audience, I wish I could see every single one of you, and thank you in person for what I think has been a really great session from our panelists. Naomi, Scott, Joe, thank you for taking your time. I know I've had a lot of sessions to help prepare for this, and you've been fabulous. I appreciate your time. And for the organizers, I genuinely appreciate your time in getting us through this. And thank you so much again. So if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out to me, Kathy.Elwood at elwoodenterprises.com. And we will definitely get back with you. Take care.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to our mega session speakers for a great session on positioning the claims department as strategic partner. Our networking break is up next, so be sure to grab some lunch. Check out our agenda and industry expert directory, and make sure to join us at 2 p.m. on creating an engaged and effective remote team and inside the mind of the fraudster. What makes fraudsters tick?